Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Um, it's a live stream today. Obviously, as part of our weekly live streams. Well, first, actually, welcome everyone that's watching. May Allah reward you all. As part of our weekly live streams, Wednesday, inshallah, every week from 8 to 9 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. So, inshallah, we're looking forward to seeing you guys in the weeks to come. But today's a bit of a solemn one. Yesterday was the 7th of the 10th, 2025. It marks the 2-year anniversary of the genocide in Gaza. 2 years on, we're seeing tremendous levels of death and levels of unreported deaths and we're going to touch on that, inshallah, what we expect the deaths to be. But let's set the stage before October 7th, and let's talk about the concept of resistance. Resistance in Palestine is something that has always been a taboo in the international world stage, even though it's something that, if you think about it logically, is completely ridiculous. This is a land that was inhabited by a people, fully inhabited by a people, right? And for millennia, and these people have historical roots to that land for a millennia or 4 millennia, right? Going back to the time of the very even pre-Israelites. So when we talk about, I mean biblical Israel, I mean the descendants of Sayyidina Israel alayhi salatu wasalam, the descendants of Sayyidina Yaqub. We're talking about their ties to the land is before Sayyidina Musa went there. And so why? Because Sayyidina Musa went there when he conquered. Sayyidina Musa didn't even reach there. Sayyidina Dawood and the Al-Malik Talut, when they Talut was a general, Allah. But when Talut entered the land, right, there were people that existed there before. Obviously, Talut entered the land. David killed Goliath, but the people didn't disappear, and the people accepted Islam at the hands of Sayyidina Dawood and Sayyidina Sulaiman, and they just integrated as part of the people. They're called the Canaanites, and these are the Palestinians that existed there from are descended from those Canaanites. And these Palestinians have existed in the land, like we said, time immemorial. And then a people come from Eastern Europe and kick these people out under the British rule. And the resistance of the indigenous population is made to be a taboo. When you think, I mean, they've been kicked out of their land, they've been driven out with tanks, so many of them were killed. And that was what they call the first Nakba, the first catastrophe. And it's in this context that we see October 7th. It's in this context. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, sorry. It's in this context that that October 7th comes to light. So a quick summary of what happened before. Very, very quick summary. First is British Mandate Palestine, and that's when the British came in and occupied the land and brutalized the people, and then promised to give a land that didn't even belong to them to establish a Jewish homeland. Right, and this is before they promised to do it before the Holocaust. So the lie about this is done because the Jews needed to escape the persecution in Europe. Well, firstly, okay, if you're being persecuted by a people, then what gives you the right to persecute another people? And secondly, this happened before the Holocaust. I mean, yeah, there was historical persecution of Jews, but again, both points still stand. And it was seen by the people that set it up, the British people that set it up, that being Rothschilds, that being the Rothschild was obviously the Jewish person that influenced it, but that being Balfour himself and the famous Balfour Declaration. Balfour himself was a politician who said that it is a win-win because it's us getting rid of a problematic element, a problematic community or a problematic element within Europe that has never been able to integrate, that being the Jewish people. And it's also us establishing a base of operations in the Middle East. So a political move, part of the colonial empire of Britain, and brutalize the people. There is groups themselves before Israel was set up were called terrorists by the British themselves for bombing the King David Hotel and many different terrorist attacks. And then those groups became the Israeli leadership, the Israeli government. And then on the back of that, then Israel was said to be established, right? And it was just foreign army coming in massacring people and kicking them out of their villages. And this is after, by the way, Jewish people had been migrating to Palestine for some time and being welcomed by the Palestinian people. And so these people, they kick out the indigenous Palestinians from their land, and Palestinians fight back. And then there's resistance. There's obviously, naturally so, if you're being hurt, if you're being killed, and so if you're being dehoused, if you're being stolen from, obviously you're going to fight back against this. There was a huge asymmetry of power, but they still fought back, and they tried to fight back in the means that were available to them. And imagine criminalizing resistance. Imagine criminalizing someone defending themselves. What the West wants the Palestinian people to do is look at the bully that's been bullying them for 12 years. And no, that's obviously, I mean, sorry, I'm using the example of a bully, but, you know, in reality, this has been going on for almost 100 years now. Obviously, not Israel itself, but the British mandate of Palestine, and the violence that has been perpetrated against the Palestinian people. We're looking at around the 1920s, even before then. So longer than 100 years of persecution. And you want the Palestinian people to accept this upon themselves and to just take it, to keep taking the beating, to keep taking their family being killed, to keep taking the fact that their land has been initially cut in half, and then they've constantly encroached on that. So way less than 50% of Palestine is left for the Palestinians. Now we have maybe currently the plan for Gaza is 20% of what was even allowed in Gaza, right? And that's Gaza is just a little slither of Palestine that was left for the Palestinians. And so in the light of that, the Palestinians tried many options. They first tried resorting to the Arab and Muslim leaders around them, right? Egypt said, don't worry, come. And a lot of Palestinians went to Egypt thinking that, okay, be on the promise that Egypt was going to fight back and take back the Palestinian lands. And it would only be a couple of weeks that they would be in Egypt. And then it never happened. And this was a ploy between the Egyptian government and the Israeli government at the time. And then they tried diplomatic measures. So there was the UN Security Council held in 1967 that made the whole two-state solution. So we keep on hearing 1967 borders, and let me see if I can pull that up actually. So we keep on hearing about 1967 borders. And so this is a map of what 1967 borders, the 1967 borders established were. This wasn't agreed, by the way, with the Palestinians. This was just a random governing body called the United Nations that have been so useless in the time coming, right? In the subsequent future. But what they did is, you see, this whole land strip is called Palestine, and they gave we're talking about like 70% of it to a set of newly established invading people that came and occupied it. And since that time, they've been encroaching into all of this land. So this small slither in the bottom left is Gaza, and that has been being described from Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. I forget the exact date, but we're talking around 60 years ago. It was being described as a concentration. Sorry, 1947. It was being described as a concentration camp. 1947, 1948. We're talking soon after the end of World War II. Soon after it was found out that the Jews were going through concentration camps in Nazi Europe. With that memory fresh in their mind, right? The American Foreign Secretary, or their equivalent, right, was describing Gaza as a concentration camp. This land has been being encroached upon for since 1967. So in 1967, they take this big chunk of land, right? And then that land gets encroached upon from 1967 onwards. So it's not like it hasn't been a static, okay, fine, we gave you your land, and they keep on referring to 1967 borders that they keep on encroaching upon, right? Uh, and again, this fantasy of a two-state solution, it was just forced upon an indigenous population that had no say in the matter. Now it's a reality. Now it's something that we see. It's not even a two-state solution. It's one military state and let's say uh, a set of smaller encampments. Subhanallah, we have a comment from a brother. The map alone is enough to show the injustice. It's so simple. And this was the injustice being held from the very beginning, right? So this was from the establishment of Israel, is that they just decided to give 70-80% of a land that belonged to a native people to an external occupying population from Eastern Europe and from all around, and using the guise of, oh, this is a homeland for the Jews. And then after that, the Israelis kept on killing Palestinians. They kept on encroaching further upon the land. And so there was something called the Oslo Accord, settled about 30 years after that, which was 1993, right? And if I just pull up Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Yes. Here we go. This is a good representation. And if I pull up what the so then 30 years later, and this is giving a backdrop, right? We have a people indigenous to a land, right? We have a people indigenous to a land that belonged to it for thousands of years, and then suddenly in 1967, that land gets occupied by a colonial force called Britain that promises a land that they don't own, a land for an indigenous population. They promise it to a set of external Eastern European invading, occupying people. That land later gets called Israel by the British. They promise it to those people in 1947. They give it 1947, I believe. They give it to them. 1967. There's conflict from that point onwards. 1967, they say, okay, fine. You know what? Let's establish a set of borders so that you guys don't argue. What they did is they gave 80-90%. They gave 70-80% to a set of external invading occupiers called Israelis that they later became Israelis, and they gave what is in red here. So let me see if there's any clearer illustration of it. Yeah, this is a good, subhanallah, this is a good illustration. So this is pre-British Mandate Palestine. 1917, the British forces conquered Palestine, right? And then they gave these small plots, Haifa, Jaffa, Jerusalem, they gave it to Jews came into Palestine and lived in these lands, right? Jewish immigration from Europe peaked, right? And they were being treated very well by the indigenous Palestinian population. The Palestinian population that was made up of Muslims and Christians and even indigenous Jews welcomed them in with open hands, right? But very few indigenous Jews. The vast majority were Muslim, right? With a small percentage of Christians. Then 1947, the Jewish immigration to Palestine, that's when it peaked, and there was fear-mongering in Europe to push Jews outside of Europe and into Palestine. And that's when the UN partition plan, so Resolution 181, this is the actual establishment of Palestine as a state. They gave half of it, they gave around half of it they gave more than half of it to to the Jews. They kicked out 50% of the indigenous Arab population. It says Arab, not even Muslim. So this is indigenous people to the land. And Jerusalem was under international control. Jerusalem was meant to be almost like a non-political area where anyone could go to. which it was under Ottoman rule, which was under Muslim rule. Anyone could go to Jerusalem. Anyone could do pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Then 1948, the Palestinians were expelled, and Zionist military forces expelled at least 750,000 Palestinians. This is what is called the Nakba. 1967, they established this as formal borders, right? And they establish that the Nakba of 1948, they established that as formal borders, right? Which is again shows the huge, like we said, the huge injustice. Then there was the Oslo Accords, and now this is really slimy and this is really sleazy. These borders that were in and of themselves, right, hoarding Palestinians up into small encampments, right? One of them called Gaza and the West Bank. These that kicked out the indigenous population into what 30% of the landmass, 20% of the landmass. In 1993, 1995, during the Oslo Accords, that land that was originally Palestinian got separated into different sections, right? Subhanallah, and that was specifically in the West Bank, right? So there was land of Area A under Palestinian control, and this was meant to be fully Palestinian control. 18% of the West Bank, which itself was a small slither of Palestine itself, right? 18% of that was said, okay, fine, this is you guys Palestinians can actually control this. Then there's 22% under Israeli Palestinian control. So what you've done is you've taken a land, Palestine, and you've basically told the Palestinian people that you can only have access to 18% of the West Bank and Gaza, right? And so Gaza is kind of its own. Gaza is meant to be under its own diplomatic control of the Palestinians, but obviously we've seen in the past 2 years how much control they've had. 18% was given to Palestinians. Area B, which is Israeli-Palestinian joint control, and that was given 22%, is Area B. And then Area C, which is entirely Israeli control. It's not even Palestine anymore, right? It's Palestinian under Israeli control. Why? Right? It's just purely Israeli expansionism, right? And then they also had the famous, very Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, the very controversial figure of the Palestinian Authority, which seceded to this Oslo Accords, and they say that he just wanted to, and those everyone knows who I'm talking about here, right? They say that he just wanted to be of some impact. So Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, right? So how big are Palestine and Israel? The original land of Palestine was all of this without any of the white gaps, right? Then what was given is the total Palestinian land is 6,000 kilometers squared, and the total Israeli land is 20,000 kilometers squared. So if you do the quick maths, Palestinians are left with, and this is considering all of the West Bank, by the way, this isn't considering that stupid 18% Area A, Area B, Area C thing. This is, if we consider the 1967 borders, they were left with 20% of their original land, right? After the 1967 borders, they're left with what, 10? Considerably less than that. They'd be left with about, on a quick estimate, about 5% of the land. And so, subhanallah, in that context, in the context of what was already given to the Israelis, right? This quote unquote Palestinian land under Israeli control. What does that mean? Why would it be Palestinian land if it's under Israeli control? It's just Israel. At this stage, they've just taken it as Israel. And so this is where the original huge expansion into the settlements began, right? Then they started invading Area B, and they're invading Area A, right? So occupied Palestinian territories, and the Israeli settlements. So now Israeli settlements and outposts, right, are across all of these areas. And what they do is, they look like little dots, but in reality, these are areas of these are areas of land where, if a Palestinian comes close, they're at risk of death. And what they'll do is they'll kick Palestinians out of the Area A's and the Area B's, which were meant to be under, and the Area C's, which these are meant to be Palestinians living here, but they'll just keep on encroaching upon these borders. There have been 600,000 to 750,000 Israeli settlers living in at least 250 settlements in occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. Again, we go back to the point of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, if we come up here, Jerusalem, it was meant to be fully, in the 1947 partition, it was meant to be fully surrounded by the Arab state. And then in 1967, it was quote unquote halved, right? Here we go. 1967, Jerusalem is meant to be half in the West Bank and half in Israel. In reality, it's all militarily under Israel's control. Here we're seeing half of it in West Bank and East Jerusalem. We're seeing half of Jerusalem in Palestine. And so that was really to just set the stage, to show us what is the backdrop for the Palestinian people, what they've been going through the past 100 years, right? Which shows that a systematic encroachment upon their land from no outcry from an international community that has claimed that it's anti-genocide, that's claimed that it wants to put an end to the atrocities that were experienced in World War I and World War II, because apparently they've learned and they've grown from this. And so the Palestinian people were kind of promised this. And they tried, like I said, they tried the UN resolution. They tried international law. They tried diplomacy. They even tried being an observer state for the UN General Assemblies, right? To try, and even though they have no voting power, they try and just and say, hey, listen to us. They've been trying this for years and years. And it hasn't worked. And in that context, and in the context of massacre after massacre of the Palestinian people leading up to October 7th in 2023, right? You've taken an indigenous population, crammed them all up into a space that had the highest population density in the world, right? And you've put the fire under them. Constant bombings, right? There was that campaign by the Israeli military called Mowing the Lawn. It shows how brutal and insane and inhuman these people are, right? That they called flattening Gaza, bombing a civilian population. They call that mowing the lawn. And it also shows the mindset. It shows that mowing the lawn is something that you do regularly. And so it's something, yeah, okay, we have to do this every once in a while. We have to flatten Gaza every once in a while. We have to kill the indigenous population every once in a while, just to make sure that they don't step out of line. Yeah? So it's so that they know that they're powerless. Or at least that's the mindset of the Israeli people, or of the Israeli government, and also the Israeli people. And so in that context, October 7th happens as an act of defiance, right? October 7th happens. So many lies about October 7th, about mass sexual violence, which was all disproven, right? The current report now condemns Hamas for sexual violence, but what is the act of sexual violence is that they put female hostages on motorbikes in between two male hostages, but that they had to transport when they were transporting them. So being in between as a hostage, being in between two other hostages was seen as an act of sexual violence, right? No rapes, complete lies about cutting babies out of stomachs, complete lies about 40 beheaded babies, complete lies about putting babies in ovens. And these lies were used to dehumanize the Palestinian people and to delegitimize the resistance of a people that have been being killed for ages. I mean, obviously, we're just talking about encroaching of the land, and I'm doing a huge disservice and an injustice to the Palestinian people by not mentioning the thousands and thousands and thousands, we're talking about hundreds of thousands here, that have been killed by the Israeli occupation before October 7th. And so in that context, I mean, we have every Palestinian family knows someone that's been killed, basically knows. And these politicians, I mean, we're talking about what's his name? Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden himself said, "I saw videos of beheaded babies," which later the United States, Allah Alam, I think it was the CIA themselves said that they don't have videos of they don't have images of beheaded babies, right? They had to correct the president who lied about saying that he saw beheaded babies. These are lies used by the Israeli government and the supporters of Israel to dehumanize the Palestinian people and to delegitimize Palestinian resistance. And it was the exact same lies that were put against all valid forms of resistance. And a very famous example is the ANC in South Africa, the party that Nelson Mandela belonged to, where their acts of resistance were deemed to be terrorism, and it was made to delegitimize uh, South African resistance um, to the apartheid that they were being faced at. Now, as was covered in my previous live stream, the grandson of Nelson Mandela himself said that the Palestinian people are going through apartheid far, far worse than the South Africans were going through. And everyone agrees that the South African resistance to apartheid was legitimate. But what happened at the time, the status quo and the powers that be at the time, being America and Britain, labeled Nelson Mandela as a terrorist. This is Nelson Mandela, who is now seen as a bastion of peace and a bastion of humanity, right? Or bastion of human rights, sorry. And this was the Nelson Mandela that at the time was being labeled by the Western leaders in the Western states as a terrorist. It shows how flaccid, it shows how empty the label of terrorist is. Is that okay? Anyone that legitimately, it's used against people that legitimately um resist apartheid, that legitimately resist occupation, that legitimately resist the massacre of their people, the genocide of their people. And it cheapens the word terrorist. And to be honest, it's been being used like this for a very long time, for time immemorial, one might say. And one second. And so the Palestinian people, they tried their options. And so what were they left with? They were left with the only thing that seemed possible at the time, or the only final option was military resistance, military action, which so many lies came out against about October 7th. And Allah knows exactly whether innocents were killed. And obviously, as Muslims, we condemn the killing of innocents. But it was initially said to be 1,400, then it was said to be 1,200. And of that, something around 60% was, Allah Alam, I'll have to check my numbers here. But a large percentage of them were IDF. These are a bunch of ragtag, right, guerrilla fighters put in an open air prison, as was being described by Western leaders, even, right? And they had a far higher rate of killing militants than the Israeli military did. The military that is meant to be able to see the brand of your shoes from satellites that they have above, or satellites that are orbiting Earth. They can see the brand of your shoes, but they still, it's like a 90%, 95%. Oh, sorry, far higher than that. It's like a 99% civilian casualty rate in Palestine. And so, yes, and the Hannibal Directive, which was just basically, okay, if there's they'll kill their own people just to flatten, to kill a bunch of Palestinians just in order, subhanallah, in order that Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, in order that, sorry, that they can't be used as leverage, right? They don't care about their own people, and this was seen from before. And then now we're seeing that in the light of that October 7th, where they were pushed to the brink, right? Now we have seen one of the quote unquote rules, as if the United Nations and the Western powers that they themselves been responsible for the biggest atrocities in the past 50 years. 100 years have been, as if they can put rules on warfare, right? But one of the rules of warfare is a basically a parallel of Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. I forget the exact term of it, but basically that the force that is used has to be like within the same sort of scale, if that's understood, right? And when we didn't see 1,200 Palestinian killed, we saw as time was progressing, thousands and thousands and thousands of Palestinians being killed, and we're going to go over the exact numbers. At first, it seemed like. I think many of you will remember that when the genocide first started, is every week we would get new death tolls where the number of deaths increased in the thousands, right? And so I just want to share with you some articles from the time. Is that here we go? No, not that one. Sorry. Here we go. This is The Guardian in January of 2024. So this was 4 months after the genocide started. In January of 2024, Gaza death toll passes 34,000 as Israel and Iran missile strikes grab global attention. Right. So in January of 2024, which was 3-4 months after the genocide started, we had 34,000. And for all of the accounts say that the genocide and the bombardment and the massacre has intensified since then. And so this isn't a what's it called? They keep on saying Hamas numbers. These are Western outlets that are reporting on this. A actual let me pull it up. An actual research paper was conducted by. Here we go. An actual research paper was conducted, published by The Lancet, that it says here, let me pull it up, that between October 7th and June 2024, so that's 6 months after the genocide started, we're seeing that we estimate 64,000 deaths due to traumatic injury during the study period. And Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Where is it? Yes. So they said 64,000 deaths, right? In between October 7th, right, 2023, and June 3rd, 2024. So about 9 months. 9 months after the genocide started, we're seeing 64,000 deaths. Now, those of you following the news will probably hear that generally 60,000 deaths as a figure just being thrown around still now. This was 9 months into the genocide. People were saying 60,000, and the official numbers were said to be 90. Were said to be Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Were said to be 50,000 around 6 months in. So 6 months in, 50,000. You're telling me after 2 years, where all the reports seem to suggest that the genocide and has intensified, the bombing has intensified, and after aid was cut off from them. And then after, aid and food was cut off from them. After 2 years of experiencing this, you're telling me that the death tolls have been the same. We're saying, if we were to extrapolate these numbers, not accounting for any deaths due to mass starvation, the mass starvation of the Palestinian people, as we saw, right, in the past months, if we were to account for the deaths, not accounting for an escalation or an intensification in the bombing campaign that we that all reports seem to suggest, then we would be looking at around 240,000 people killed. If we were to not consider any sort of any sort of intensification, or the fact that they've been starved, or there's mass starvation going on, man-made famine that's been taking place in Gaza. If we were not to take any of that into account, we're looking at estimates just from pure extrapolation of about 240,000. And that's not taken into account also the more creative ways that Israel has decided to kill people, which is to round people up in cattle pens where they're looking for aid from aid distribution points, and then they just what's it called? Unleash machine guns on them. 240,000. This is a number that's being reported. This is an extrapolation from numbers that were reported a year and a half ago when the genocide started. Then there's also reports that conservative reports that 70,000 people died in the first year. So if we extrapolate that 140,000, right? We're talking about 140,000, 250,000. This is a genocide to a level that we haven't seen since World War II. And subhanallah, all of these Western leaders and all of these Western powers are complicit in that. And this was an act of resistance. Sorry, I needed to mention this as well. When we were talking about the background where the kind of the state of affairs that the Palestinian people saw themselves in, they were a people that were forgotten by the world stage. Every once in a while, you'd get, I don't know, protests taking place in, and there were a lot of countries, to be honest, right? And the people would pay attention to them, but then it would die down and people would forget, and politicians never cared, and politicians wanted to push for pro-Israeli narratives. And so October 7th happened in that kind of landscape where the Palestinian people were forgotten, and then Gulf states and Arab Muslim states were, or Muslim in quotations, obviously, were pursuing normalization with Israel, which would forget about the Palestinian people entirely and which would entirely delegitimize their presence in the region. And so in that context, the Palestinian people had to fight back, and they had to say, hey, don't let us be forgotten. We're being killed here. We're being massacred here, right? Don't let us be forgotten. And so they resist. And there's a conversation to be had about the legitimacy of resistance. That's not to say that I condone everything, but that's just to say that resistance can't be labeled entirely as unjustified and entirely as terroristic, right? Because if so, then you give the bully free rein to do whatever they want. People have to be able to fight back against the bully, and this is just something so fitri, so obvious, right? If you're attacked, you have the right to defend yourself. Where was the right of the Palestinian people to defend themselves? The right of the Israeli people to defend themselves allowed them to kill what in the lowest reports say to be 60,000, 70,000 Palestinians at a rate of 1 to 60, right? So we saw 1,000 Israelis killed to 60,000 at least Palestinians killed, and mass starvation inflicted upon a civilian population, and what's it called? An entire, flattening of Gaza, destruction of homes. That's the self-defense that's allowed for the Israelis, but no self-defense allowed for the Palestinians. No, they have to accept the state of affairs that they're in, the massacres that that are imposed upon them every once in a while. And again, they tried civil non-violent resistance. Right, there was the March of Return where Palestinians would go up to the wall, right, and snipers would just shoot them down, mow them down, right. And we have testimonies from the snipers themselves that every bullet hit its mark. So when they were killing civilians, it was intentional. 2 years of the genocide has been taking place. And in those 2 years, the Palestinian people have been put through, and the people in Gaza have been put through, brutality that no people can be expected to bear for a long time. May Allah give them steadfastness. The Palestinian people have been steadfast. And this is the famous sumud of the Palestinian people. Sumud meaning steadfastness. Sumud meaning unwaveringness. And they've been steadfast in that. And now they've been proposed this deal from President Trump, this 20-point plan from Trump, and who gave a different idea to the Arab leaders and then passed it off as all the Arab leaders agreed to this, right? Trump has proposed this deal that they said they have 72 hours to cooperate with and 72 hours to send back the hostages. And this was, it's not a real, peace attempt. It's not a real attempt at peace. We've seen the Hamas was willing to negotiate about the hostages a long time ago, and obviously the Israeli government, Netanyahu himself, wasn't willing to go for that. I mean, so it's not about the hostages, as we are well aware of. Trump's claiming that Hamas is ready for a lasting. Hamas was presented with this plan, and they've been bombed to oblivion. Where, wallahi, as a Muslim, it's painful to see that these people that were fighting for their rights, right, have been killed and massacred and genocided for trying to stand up for their rights and trying to stand up for themselves. And so now, just to stop the killing and just to allow the Palestinian people, the people of Gaza, to just giving them a bit of space to breathe, right, without being killed, without being scared that their family, they've gone through 2 years where they don't know if they're going to wake up the next morning. And so Hamas is doing this, they're accepting this peace deal, even though their rights are still being encroached upon. I mean, the state of affairs just naturally, that two-state solution naturally in Palestine isn't encroachment upon their rights. But they, just to stop the killing, they said, okay, fine, we will accept some of the terms. The famous terms being all the hostages have to be released and the dead hostages as well. And the Hamas has to step down. Hamas has to be dismantled. Palestine entirely, Gaza entirely has to be demilitarized, as in no weapons in Gaza for the Palestinian people. And a set of external parties, a set of external leaders, including Israel or largely Israel and other Western powers as well, will have a hand in forming this new governance of Gaza, right? This new leadership in Gaza. And so what Hamas has agreed to is a exchange of hostages, right? Still, we have far too many hostages in Israeli jails where they come out, as we see, malnourished. They come out looking like zombies. They come out looking like corpses. They come out not being able to speak from the amount of torture that they've endured. And so Hamas has agreed to an exchange of some of the Palestinian hostages that are currently languish in Israeli prisons and have done so, some of them for 20 years, some of them for longer than that, some of them for lifetimes, some of them with no hope of getting out of this continuous torture. Hamas has agreed to exchange of hostages. They've agreed that they won't be part of a new Gaza leadership. But what they do want to discuss and what they want to negotiate is the new leadership of Gaza and the new leadership of Palestine. Because it doesn't make sense to leave it with a Western Israeli forces, right? I just want to show you what the proposed plan for Gaza is now. So here we go. This is a good kind of summary. Is the proposed plan for Gaza now is, and this is being reported on by the Financial Times, is the proposed plan for Gaza. One moment. Here we go. The proposed plan for Gaza is this currently, right? The blue line is the IDF current line of control. So the IDF will control all of Gaza except what's inside this. Subhanallah, or at least that's my understanding. No, sorry. They will, they control all. Sorry, they already control this blue line. When the hostages are released, they'll go back to this yellow line, which is so they'll still control half of Gaza, right? Then the second withdrawal, when ISF mobilized per standards set in Trump's plan, as in when a new governing body made up of, like was being said, Tony Blair and these other war criminals, right? When they get put in power, then they will withdraw to this second line. And guys, like Gaza was already a concentration camp, was already the biggest open air prison in the world, right? And that's not saying the widest. It had the largest population density, right? But subhanallah, and they want to take half of the land until a new leadership comes in. Then they'll go to the second part of the land, and then the third withdrawal with the security buffer zone. They want to encroach even further. And so this buffer that I'm showing here, they want to encroach even further into that land, right? That's their plan. That's what they want for Gaza, right? This is another illustration of it, right? Is that no, sorry. This was. Well, this is what Gaza looks like currently, right? But this is their plan. Their plan is to withdraw to these areas over time. By the way, they're planning to stay here, right? So they just want to. They're going to take over a part of Gaza anyway, right? Make this a security blockade to even further tighten what's it called, the Palestinian people. And these are people that, like we said, it has to be constantly repeated that these people have been they've been undergoing this mass displacement of their people from 1918 all the way up to now, and now they only exist in what, like 5% of the land, right? So subhanallah. I mean, they only have control, sorry, over 5% of the land. In reality, they might exist in 20% of the land. But especially the people of Gaza, now they've all been pushed down to this small area, right? The small coastal region. And if you think it was the most densely populated place in the world when all of Gaza was inhabited, now that they're pushed into the current climate, you can imagine how bad things are. And so this is the plan the plan that was put forward by Trump and Netanyahu and the Israelis and the Americans. And so Hamas is negotiating right now on exactly what the leadership will be, and they don't want to demilitarize. They don't want to get rid of all their weapons. Now, why is that super important, right? It's because we've seen, what is Israel's track record when it comes to violence? Their track record is they've been the ones to break the ceasefires every time. They've been the ones to kill people every time. It's just that Palestinians are expected to not have a response, right? So, and they broke the most recent ceasefire, the one that happened about a year ago, last Ramadan. They broke that ceasefire by just bombing and killing Palestinians. And so Israel has a track record of breaking treaties, and so making treaties, lying, breaking those treaties later on, and then expecting no international pushback. And there isn't international pushback, but they expect, the Palestinian people to just lie down and take being stepped all over, right? And so this is the track record of the Israelis. You can't trust the lives of the Palestinian people in the Israelis' hands. because their track record is just genocide. That's their track record. And so it's not safe to leave a civilian population in the hands of the Israelis, because most likely there will be a further escalate, or they'll be killed with no way to defend themselves, right? And the strongest deterrent to violence is that the person can fight back. So it's not safe for Hamas to leave, to take out all the weapons from Palestine. Also, sorry, let's go over the timeline of events. Is that let me share my screen here. Here we go. So, wait. Here we go. It's Trump tells Israel, stop bombing Gaza as Hamas agrees to release Israeli hostages as part of peace deal. So Hamas has said, like I said, they said that they agreed to parts of this peace deal. And Trump messaged on his Truth Social that he said Israel has to stop bombing Gaza now, right, so that we can continue with this hostage release plan, right? Trump has said that Hamas is ready for a lasting peace after the Palestinian militants agreed to release all remaining hostages, as he called on Israel to stop bombing Gaza. And this was the
I want to thank the countries that helped me put this together: Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and so many others. So many people fought so hard. This is a big day. We'll see how it all turns out. We have to get the final word down and concrete. Very importantly, I look forward to having the hostages come home to their parents, and having some of the hostages, unfortunately, you know the condition they're in, come home likewise to their parents, because their parents wanted them just as much as though that young man or young woman were alive. So I just want to let you know that this is a very special day, maybe unprecedented in many ways. It is unprecedented, but thank you all. And thank you all to those great countries that helped. We were given a tremendous amount of help. Everybody was unified in wanting this war to end and seeing peace in the Middle East. And we're very close to achieving that. Thank you all, and everybody will be treated fairly.
So Trump wants this to go through. We'll see in the future exactly what happens, because the Palestinian people, because Hamas hasn't agreed to all the conditions, right? And also, I just wanted to point out a couple of things on this point. Well, firstly, what is the reactions of people in Gaza to this reality, right, or to the possible Trump peace deal, right, or let's say cessation of bombing, right? But no, sorry, this is a different clip actually. It shows the US's complicity in what's it called, in the genocide, and it shows how the Palestinian people wanted to take a diplomatic solution. Sorry, it shows that the Palestinian people wanted to go for a diplomatic solution, but that wasn't afforded to them. That wasn't available to them. So let's quickly watch this clip. They went for a diplomatic solution, and these are all of the vetoes that the US did against the ceasefire in Gaza that allowed incoming. And so, just important for us to go over. And the last one is that, so Trump has a history of lying and changing his mind, right? Trump has a history of, and for example, there was one Israeli American, right, citizen that was released by Hamas as a hostage as a part of a peace deal to guarantee that all aid will be let in, that US will stop its embargo upon embargo on aid, right? And that obviously wasn't honored by Trump. He said that he would, and he didn't, right? And we already spoke about Israel's history of breaking treaties and lying through their teeth. And so it's very dangerous to trust the Israelis, and it's very dangerous to trust Trump. But I think Hamas at this stage, they've been pushed so far. They want some level of life for the Palestinian people, right? For the people of Gaza. And it's not been allowed to them. So if they resist, they get killed. And if they stop resisting, they can breathe a little bit. They're allowed to breathe a little bit. Still in jail, but they're allowed to breathe. And they're resisting legitimately. The last point I wanted to touch on for this live stream is, what is the future of the Palestinian resistance? And whether this was a success, whether what Hamas did was a success, right? Again, I don't condone the actions of Hamas, but from their perspective, right? And I say that entirely for a legal reason. Let's speak firstly of whether it was a success. From a level of deaths, obviously more of us died than they did, or then sorry, more of our brothers and sisters died than Israelis did. However, as Umar ibn al-Khattab said, ours are in Jannah and theirs are in Jahannam. So as a Muslim, we don't see the deaths of people to be an abject loss, right? It's seen to be as a victory for the individual. Imma shahada wa imma nasr. May Allah accept them as shuhada. On a second level is that the reason why Hamas did this, they knew that there was an asymmetry in power. They knew that if they were to attack Israel, that there was going to be a very heavy-handed response. Heavy-handed is not even an appropriate word, that they would be genocided. They knew this, but it was the only way to put Palestine back on the world, back in the attentions of people, right? These are people that just want some people to, they want to be noticed because they have been going through occupation and apartheid and oppression and massacres for on an ongoing basis for the past 100 years, right? And people are just forgotten. And the Arab leaders wanted to normalize with Israel. And so it was to put Palestine back on the world map and to allow people to remember, hey, there are still people there that are currently undergoing persecution. And so from that perspective, it's been entirely successful, right? We have seen Palestine being spoken about in a way that we wouldn't, as Palestinian activists and as Muslims, we wouldn't have imagined 5-6 years ago. No one would have imagined Netanyahu being condemned by the International Criminal Court. No one would imagine Netanyahu being condemned by the International Court of Justice. No one would have imagined people legitimately speaking about Palestinian resistance. No one would have. This is all 6 years ago. We're talking about on a political sphere. We're not talking about let's say at a lower general level. We're talking about in the level of international politics. We're seeing Palestine being spoken about in a way that people didn't imagine 5-6 years ago, let alone 20-30 years ago. So definitely there was a success there. Also, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, is that normalization was reversed, right? We will see what happens in the future. May Allah give victory to the Palestinian people, and anyone that betrays them, may Allah humiliate them in this world and the next. So from that aspect, it's definitely a success, and it's put so reverse normalization. So it's definitely a success there. Put Palestine back on the world stage. I mean, inshallah, changes have been taken that can't be undone, and a change has happened in the minds of people that, again, not only can't be undone, but inshallah will cause a paradigmal shift that we will see manifesting in the future of politics. We will see manifesting in the future generations, just as it manifested in South Africa when it came to Nelson Mandela taking power, and just as it manifested in Vietnam when it came to the US pulling out. inshallah, this is what we hope to see, and this is what Hamas's aim was. And from that perspective, it's definitely a success. And the final note: what is the future of the Palestinian resistance? Allah knows best. We are likely to see that, and this is why I implore all of those listening and everyone that was part of any sort of activism for Palestine, I implore them all to continue their activism, because if not, and if attention is taken away from Palestine, Israel will use this as I mean, they were willing to kill and bomb people when Palestine was the center piece of attention of the news, right? And so if attention falls away from it, then violence is going to escalate to a level that, again, we don't want to see. And so stay protesting, because the state of affairs has never been it hasn't been acceptable for the past 100 years, right? Stay protesting, stay fighting for the rights of the Palestinian people, their rights for humanity, their rights for self-determination, their rights to life. And we're likely to see a continuation of violence against the Palestinian people after a short, Allah knows how long it's going to last, a short breathing session, right? Even then, Allah knows if they're going to get aid, Allah knows if they're going to get food. But naturally, when we speak about the future of the resistance, naturally, when there is injustice, there's always going to be resistance to that injustice. And I'm not saying that at a level that I support necessarily, but what I'm saying is that it's a reality. It's an undeniable reality that if you treat people unjustly, if you oppress people, then there's going to be a resistance to this. And this has happened throughout all oppressed people all over the world. And so this isn't killed the resistance. This isn't killed the flame. This isn't doused the flame of Palestinian liberation. It's actually further invigorated it. And so, like I said, inshallah, let's keep up the activism. Let's keep up the protest. And that's if the peace goes through. Israel could just not, could just claim that it's not, the conditions aren't satisfactory, and keep the bombing campaign up. If the peace goes through, keep the protests, or if this quote unquote peace plan, right, goes through, which further treats the Palestinian people unjustly, then we have to keep on being at the front lines of the protest, and we have to keep on keep our loud voices for the Palestinian freedom and Palestinian liberation for the Palestinian people. And we trust, as a Muslim, we trust that this is all in Allah's hands, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yarzuqu tilka al-ayyam nudawiluha bayna an-nas. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that these are the days that we exchange between people, right? So, and in the ma'al usri yusra, right? That verily with hardship comes ease. So with this hardship that we're being faced with as an ummah, will come an ease, and will come a nasr for the Palestinian people. And we know as Muslims that the nasr will come. We know that the victory of Islam will come, the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come. And it's a matter of whether you want to be a part of that victory, or whether you want to be sidelined, and whether you want to come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Yawm al-Qiyamah and say, I did nothing. I lost hope. I didn't trust your word, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I didn't do anything for my brothers and sisters in Palestine. None of us want to come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with that. So let us do the minimum, and the minimum is to do as much as we can in these countries for the Palestinian people, and inshallah be a part of that victory. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله ولي ولكم فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. And inshallah, we hope to see you next Wednesday, when I'll be joined with our brother James. Obviously, he couldn't make it today, but you had just me, inshallah. And inshallah, we will be joined by our brother very soon. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.